very much for agreeing to be interviewed today. All the questions I'm going to put to you have been sent in from young people across East London. They cover quite a diverse range of topics, so let's get started. So you began your career as a dancer with the Royal Ballet. So when did you know you wanted to be a professional dancer, and how did your career begin?
Gosh, so first of all, let me say it's a real pleasure to have this conversation with you, and I'm really delighted you've been able to source all these questions. I hope that I can provide answers that are interesting and entertaining. I am so in my family, the family legend is that I was always going to be a ballet dancer. You know, that was just it. And I suspect the truth is that, like a lot of young children, I skipped around a bit. I liked to dance, and that translated into, oh, you know, I'm going to be a dancer. But it was definitely always my goal. It was a thing I was going to do. And the thing about ballet, professional ballet, it is a very extreme physical discipline. And so you do have to start training at quite a young age. And that's because it really takes 10 years of training to acquire the necessary expertise, physical expertise. But those years have to take place when you're relatively young, because the older you get, the less you're able to become flexible. And most people will know that for ballet dancers, flexibility is a key kind of component. So I started to dance when I was 7 at a local ballet school. And then I went to professional ballet school when I was 11, which was a boarding school. So it meant leaving home and going and living in Richmond Park in just outside London. And then I did 7 years in the school, which was, again, not a straightforward journey, because you were assessed every year and tested and were you going to get through. And then I joined the Royal Ballet when I was 18. So a relatively young start to working life.
So you said that obviously lots of children do ballet when they're young, but not many people go on to pursue it as a profession. So do you have any advice for aspiring young dancers who maybe want to become a professional?
Yes, I mean, I would encourage anybody to try dancing, because there's lots and lots of benefits, not just the physical fitness and exercise, but the being part of a group, the fact that you're combining physicality with sort of questions of artistry and communication. And so I think it's a great thing for people to try. But I always say to people who are thinking about it as a profession, make sure it's what you really, really want to do, because it is it is challenging physically. It's challenging in terms of commitment. It will mean that you miss out on some other things. So, you know, it is really incompatible with going to university. It's incompatible with going out partying a lot when you're sort of 16, 17, 18. You know, it is about discipline and focus. And if it's what you want to do, they don't feel like sacrifices at all. But if you don't really want to do it, divert your energies somewhere else. I think the other thing I would always say to anybody who's entering that focused a profession is keep your interest broad. So don't be tempted to simply focus solely on the ballet. I know I said that it requires that focus, but you must make sure that you continue to cast your eyes wide, to find out what's going on in the world, and for two reasons, really. One, it makes you a better artist, because artists don't operate in a vacuum. And two, well, there's three reasons, really. The second is it makes you a better citizen, and we are all citizens alongside what we do. And the third thing is that as a dancer, it is not going to last the whole of your life. You know, it is a short stay profession. So you will be doing something else at the end. So for all those reasons, I say, keep those nets cast wide, keep your interests alive.
Your career with the Royal Ballet has drawn considerable interest from the students writing the questions. So I've compiled a kind of quick fire round just to make sure that we cover everything. So firstly, what was your favourite ballet to dance?
Oh, well, I always have to cheat and have two at this point, because so we have what we call the classical repertoire. So, you know, those great ballets from the past, and there is a certain thrill. There's a huge thrill in conquering those or achieving those. It's like climbing Mount Everest. So I had a particularly good experience in Swan Lake. So that would be one of my all-time favorites. But at the same time, you're also doing new work, you're creating new things, and that has its own excitement. So in that category, that new work category, I would put a ballet called Step Text, which is by an American choreographer called William Forsythe. It actually wasn't made for me, but he mounted it in the UK for me for the first time. And it was me with 3 men, a red leotard, point shoes, nothing to hide behind. It was just about the physicality. So really at 2 extremes there, one modern, one classic work.
And does that differ from your favourite ballet to go and watch?
Oh, that's a really good question. Now, that's changed over time, to be honest. Now I tend to want to see things. I either want to see the greatest interpretation. So I'm happy to go and see Swan Lake, if I really feel this is going to be a great performance. I'm really interested in where people are putting dance into different environments. So when it's not on a stage, I'm fascinated by the potential of that. But over the years, it's changed. And there are some ballets that are somehow so perfect. And I think, what would I put in that category? Kenneth Macmillan's Romeo and Juliet. It is just the perfect combination of drama, music, design, and choreography, which absolutely tells the story. You can read the relationships into the steps.
I believe that ballet is being performed next year, isn't it? At the
well, you're one ahead of me. It's very frequently performed, and you can watch it. There are plenty of sort of films of it. And for anybody who wants to try ballet for the first time, I always recommend that, actually, because most people know the story, which helps.
Yes. So what was the most exciting thing about performing at the Royal Opera House?
Oh, gosh. There were so many exciting things. Let me name a few. I loved being part of a family. The company had about 90 dancers, and then there was a stage crew, and they'd probably known you for 20 years. It felt like a family. It felt we were working as a team to achieve something extraordinary, and I did love that. But those rare occasions when everything seemed to go right. And it didn't happen that often, but those are the memories that I really kind of hug to myself as being, culmination of decades of work. And there's 5 minutes when I really got it right.
And was there a particular person who inspired you to take up dancing, or?
Not to take up dancing, no, because I said it was always there in my, but which probably a psychiatrist would say, well, actually, it was probably your mum. My mum would have loved to have been a dancer, and she probably planted this little seed in my head. So in a sense, it was my mum. But then there was a series of women throughout my sort of training and life, a brilliant teacher called Patricia Linton, who was a total inspiration. And then in the ballet company, Monica Mason, who was a principal dancer, one of the leading dancers when I joined, and then became the director. So she was always an inspiration, always an inspiration.
I know this next question has come from a younger student, but she wanted to know if it hurts to go on point as a ballet dancer.
So for people who don't know, on point means dancing literally, if this was my foot, on the tip of your toe, and it doesn't hurt, except so the trick, the technique of dancing on point is all about the strength in your legs. It's absolutely about muscle strength above the toes. You're not just standing on your toes. The shoes are really important. You have to have the right shoes. So the only time it hurts is if you've been on holiday and not been dancing and you come back, a bit like anything, if you went running after you hadn't run, your muscles ache, then it would hurt. Or if you got what we would call a skin toe. So if the shoes rubbed on your toes and you rubbed the skin off, so it was raw flesh against the toe, that really hurt. But largely, no, it's all in the training. Don't do it too early is the bigger tip.
Yep. So I've just got one final question before I move on to other things. So during this lockdown period, the importance of the arts has really been highlighted. So why do you think arts are so important for our well-being, and how can we make arts more accessible for everyone?
It's such a huge question, isn't it? And you know, one of the things that we've heard over and over during the lockdown is that, you know, the arts have been closed. And I sort of listen to that and I say, well, which way are you looking? Because yes, theatres have been closed, but theatres are just a place that we do the art. And actually, all sorts of arts organisations have been very much open and have been finding ways to really serve their communities, either through supporting education, by providing activities that support mental health and well-being, by bringing people together through creative opportunities, usually online, by, you know, streaming performances. So the arts have been open, and as you say, we have all discovered again for ourselves the importance of creativity in expressing ourselves, in finding an outlet. We have all discovered the importance of you know, physical activities, and the arts, especially dance, are incorporated in that. I think we are going to find the arts are increasingly important as we come out of the lockdown, because we know that there is a big mental health challenge. People have really struggled with this, and there is lots of evidence about how the arts can help us enhance our well-being. They can help us communicate better with one another. So I think there is lots of evidence, and there's more research going on about these things. How can we make the arts more accessible? I mean, there are some arts organisations that would obviously put their head in their hands when they hear that, because, you know, they are all about being for their communities. And then there are arts organisations that appear to be for a more narrow group of people. I think it has to start in school, because if you don't encounter arts in the one place where we do find all young people, which is school, then really, what is the likelihood that you are going to think of it? You know, I mean, so I think getting the arts back into the curriculum is really, really important, and they are being pushed out of the curriculum a bit, and I really applaud those schools that are going out of their way to make sure that people do have these opportunities. You know, it always strikes me as not a coincidence that fee-paying schools, independent private schools, all have lots of arts in their curriculum, because they know the value of it for young people, not just about whether they're going to attend the theatre or not. That matters less than, are they going to explore themselves, discover their own potential, you know, have access to all of the pleasures and the self-discovery and the opportunities through the arts. And we see that this happens in fee-paying schools, and in the state schools, because I know there are other pressures, is getting pushed out, and we need to reverse that.
Mm-hmm. Right, so I'm going to move on to your career post-ballet now.
Okay.
So after retiring as a dancer, you've since held a number of different roles in management, broadcasting, and as a writer. So one student asks, how did you make the transition from your ballet role to the next stage of your career?
Yeah, and it's a really good question. I said earlier, ballet dancers finish their careers very, very early. So you have a number of routes you can go. You can retrain, or you can, retrain basically, or go into another career. I was, so in my last years as a ballet dancer, remember I worked in a really big organisation, the Royal Opera House, and I had spotted that this big organisation wasn't really connecting with some of those smaller arts companies, that some of the ones I've been mentioning. And it seemed to me that they had lots of really exciting creative things to offer. And we had lots of things to offer too, but never the twain shall meet. So I developed a program to really find a way to bring those small scale companies into the Opera House, to give them access to the resources that we have, so that we could maybe get, you know, some of their creative and imaginative thinking. And it was really as a result of doing that that I tipped into my role, my next role, which was creative director at the Opera House. And really that was about a new boss arriving at the Opera House, seeing what I was doing in my own time and saying, well, I think we should formalize this program. So really what I had done was, and I say this to people, as a piece of career advice, really, keep an eye out for, you know, if there is a gap, if you're seeing a gap, it probably means somebody else is seeing that gap, which probably means there is a gap. So think about how you might fill that gap. And that is what I did. I wasn't meaning to do it. It wasn't as thought through as that, but that is what happened. I thought the Opera House ought to be doing this. It wasn't really doing it. So I started doing it, and lo and behold, it became my next job. Yeah, it sounds easy, doesn't it? I think that, yes.
So the next question, so recently in the news, there's been a lot of talk about the way that women are treated, both in wider society, but also within the workplace. So you've held lots of leadership roles, both at the Royal Opera House and now at King's College. Were there any challenges that you faced as a female leader?
I think there are challenges that all women face. And there are challenges that other groups face too, but we're focusing now on the challenges that women face, because although there have been massive shifts in my lifetime, and even in, certainly in my mother's lifetime, massive shifts in the rights of women, how women are perceived, how women are treated, there is still a very strong underlying historic dominance of the male within our culture. That there is, and that will change, but we're not there yet. So there are always a number of small barriers for women. I've been fortunate in that I've worked in both at the Opera House and at King's in organisations where there have been some very strong female people in the leadership. So I haven't ever felt that I'm sort of on my own. I've always had people that I can look to as their example. I mean, probably the most male-dominated environment I find myself now is in the Lords. Because,
yes.
I mean, again, look at the language there. We call it the Lords. It's actually the Lords and the Ladies, but it's the Lords. And although I think we're about 25% female now, and there are some fantastic women peers who really make a difference, it is very much, the balance is definitely, in favour of the males right now. So that's the place where I feel that most strongly. At King's, I think we have within the acting principal at the moment, and of the 5 vice principals, 1, 2, 3 of us are women. So I've been lucky in that regard, but I see the barriers, I see the behaviours, often unintentional behaviours, where men are called to speak first in a meeting rather than whoever put their hand up first. So it's a series of small, I would call them microaggressions, but they're not always intended to be aggressive. Sometimes they're just habits.
So kind of there's been steps in the right direction, but there's still a long way to go.
I think that, there've been massive steps. Look, if you think about the Equalities Act and conditions for maternity leave and massive shifts within the last sort of 50 years. But there is some way to go, and I think globally there's some way to go, because not all countries are at the same stage of this journey.
So moving on to the next question, what are the most important skills for a leader like yourself to have, and how can one start developing those skills as a student?
That's a really interesting question, and I do think sounds like a cliche coming, cliche alert coming up, but leadership really is a journey. It is not a state that you achieve. And leadership, I think, can look different in different situations. So different leaders are required at different times. And I'm sure a history student would have a set of examples as to why a great leader works at one time, but then fails at another time. From my perspective, what I've learned, and where I'm at now, I would say some of the key attributes that I find really important are listening, actively listening, recognizing that people have different working styles, they work in different ways, they hear things in different ways, and they say things in different ways. So being attuned to that. I think I'm very interested in this idea of leading through serving and serving through leading. So that a leader, in the field I come from, ballet, the leader was always at the front of the room. That was how the rehearsals worked. The teacher was at the front. And actually, the best leaders I've seen are somewhere in the middle. They're not necessarily at the front of the room. They're often They're often working behind the scenes. And so I think taking the ego out of it, and I know that's counter to what we think of leadership. And sometimes we want our leaders to be there and visible and so on, but actually leading groups of people to achieve the best that you can achieve collectively doesn't always mean you being in the spotlight. And the final point I would say is recognizing the absolute need for us all to fail from time to time, both individually and as institutions, because, if we don't fail, we're probably not trying hard enough, and failure is a natural part of learning. And so trying to create an environment in which the shame is taken out of failing so that you can discuss failure and take the learning from it. And I think that's an important characteristic too.
Okay, thank you. I've got one more question in this section of the interview about your the work you've done as a writer and a broadcaster. So you've written for newspapers, magazines, and released 4 books, if my research is correct. So one student asks, when and why did you start writing, and what advice do you have for someone who wants to be a journalist or a writer?
Yeah, I mean, writing is probably one of the things I love the most, and it's something I always did. So I actually started writing by writing a diary. I wrote a diary from age 7, and I did it religiously until my mid-20s. And in some ways, that was a great practice for writing. So dancers live a weird life. Very often people are looking for dancers to say something about, I don't know, hairstyles or fashion or what they're doing over the summer, and sometimes they're looking for you to write little pieces, and increasingly I was called upon to write those bits and pieces. What did I think of X, Y, or Z? Why do the arts matter, like your question earlier, these kind of things. And this sort of grew and grew and grew, really, until I spoke at the Oxford Union, and that was a kind of key turning moment because it raised my profile in a different sort of environment. The first invitation to write a book came from my agent at the time. She's sadly no longer with us, and she had read the things I was writing about nutrition. So I was actually writing about something I was passionate about, which was nutrition within the context of the dance world. And she wrote to me and said, I can see you have some very trenchant views on this. Would you like to consider writing a book? So it was her invitation, and that led to further invitations from publishers to do things. I can't give people I've been so lucky. The reason I was asked to write for newspapers is because I was a dancer. So I'm not really qualified to tell people what steps to take to be a journalist. But I do think one of the best it's not training, but the best strengthening measures for a writer is to read. Read everything you can, because actually within reading is how you write. If you can, and of course you have to have something to say. That's true. But I mean, journalism is a very interesting profession, and it is a profession that is not nearly as diverse as it should be. So, I mean, your advice might be better than mine, frankly, but I would say, get onto your school and university sort of student publications, get writing. And these days, of course, start your own blog, because we can all do that, can't we? We can, but just get writing and get your voice out there.
I think that's pretty good advice. As we near the end of our interview, I just have 1 or 2 final questions. So one student asked, this is maybe quite a difficult question, what is your proudest achievement?
Oh, that's really interesting. Gosh, what is my pride? That's really interesting, because that involves you allowing yourself to be proud about things you've achieved, which for a lot of us, for many people is a real challenge, and that's a challenge for me too, because I'm much more likely to look at what I do and to think about what I'm disappointed in. But I think I'm proud of having turned my learning to new purposes. I mean, I've had such an unusual background. Like I said to you, I was out of education by age 18, into the workplace, a very particular workplace, not a workplace that was books and research and literature. No, I was on the stage doing it. And actually, I've managed to translate those skills and experiences to a new purpose within the Royal Opera House, and then to a new purpose within a higher education institution, and now in the Lords. And probably, I don't know if it's quite my proudest, but when I left the Royal Opera House, I was very aware that I'd had 31 years there, and I'd learned a tremendous amount, but it was all within one environment. So there was a question for me as to whether all of that knowledge was any value whatsoever anywhere else. It's okay on this planet. Is it going to work on the next planet? And actually, when I got to King's, I discovered that yes, I could translate that learning, and I could bring some value to King's. So that's, I guess, proud. I don't know, not sure about that word still, but I'll just let that one sit there as something that I feel I did achieve something.
So the final question I'll ask you. What projects are you currently working on, and has lockdown affected your work or the goals of your work at all?
Well, I think lockdown's affected all of us, hasn't it? And I think we should all cut ourselves a bit of slack and allow ourselves to recognize that the fact that we're here having this conversation and still engaging after a full year, really, and to recognize that we've all achieved a tremendous amount, and it's been difficult for everybody. So I think when lockdown first happened, because my job is so much about talking to people and about meeting people and so on. And I remember thinking, well, that's it then. That's my job gone. I can't meet anyone. And then, of course, this thing called Microsoft Teams came along, and I realized that actually you can have really quite good meetings, right? We're having one right now. Great conversations. Yes. So it's massively shifted. And I think from my King's perspective, there has been we have all of us turned our attention even more to our students and to what can we do to support our students during this time. And we all have a different remit. So my remit, as you know, is thinking about London. So so we are very focused on thinking, what are the opportunities in London we can continue to bring to our students, even in this virtual world? How can we use the networks, the connections, the unique access to London's institutions to really support our students? So the work has pivoted. It's somehow non-essential things. It's a bit like retail, right? Non-essential things have just fallen away, and we've focused on what we need to do. So within my my sort of area that I look after, we're thinking a lot about what we don't like calling extracurricular, but those opportunities around the core learning that we can provide for students, and that's a real focus right now. There's the Civic Challenge, which is happening, which I know you know about, and then there's also the work I do in the Lords. So within the Lords, we're focusing a lot. I sit on the communications committee, so we're focusing on freedom of expression in an online environment. And this is a really live topic. Freedom of expression anyway is a very live topic, but how do you regulate the online environment to be somewhere where you can both be safe, but also safe from harm, that is, but also where people have a right to express themselves and voices aren't silenced. So that's a really, really interesting piece of work, and we'll have a report coming out, either later in the year or next year. But we're taking a lot of evidence right now, so that's an area of focus for me.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting and quite important as well. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for speaking to us today. Thank you on behalf of all the students whose questions you've answered. I'm sure they all appreciate it. So again, thank you. Oh, it's been really great. Thank you very, very much indeed. Thank you for inviting me.